Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another intern interview. Today, I am here with another St. George's University School of Medicine alum, Dr. Mami Hafron. And she is currently a pediatrics intern at the State University of New York Downstate, also more commonly known as SUNY Downstate, in Brooklyn, New York. So I'm so happy that she's taking the time to talk to us today. I'm excited to get to know more about her and more about pediatrics in general. So the first question that I have for you is, can you briefly just tell us a little bit about how you wound up going to a Caribbean medical school in the first place?
Yes. Okay. So, I just a little bit of background. I started out as an art major in high school. So going into college was a little bit hard for me, just in terms of switching my brain from arts to science. So during college, it was a bit of a difficult journey, and even finding resources and all those different things. So I feel like I wasn't able to properly get the guidance that I needed. And I think that played a huge role in how I went about applying for medical school, right? So when I applied for medical school, I applied to US schools, 14 of them, and I wasn't able to get into them. My MCAT score, I passed, but it wasn't as high as it needed to be, right? And I think at that point I got rejected from the 14 schools, and I just had a breakdown. And I think I took a year and a half off, and I was just I just can't, I need to reevaluate my life. During college, we had some people from Caribbean schools like AUC, AUA come and talk to us, but I just wanted to do my own research. And I think I found SGU through my research, and I looked at their residency match rates and all those different things that made me feel comfortable in going to that school. And that's when I was just you know what? This is another route that people have succeeded in becoming doctors, so why not? And I just gave it a shot. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems like your path was very similar to mine in the sense that I also applied to, I think 10 to 12 US schools, got rejected twice by them. I went through 2 rounds
You
myself.
did it 2 different years?
2 different years, yeah. I think I did 10 or 12 the first year. And then when I reapplied, I included some DO programs as well, and still nada. So similar situation. But I think what you mentioned is that it's really important to reflect on the reasons why you're not getting into the school in general, and kind of knowing what those mistakes were so that you're prepared to, be ready for medical school when you ultimately get there, whether you choose Ross or SGU or AUC, wherever you go. Reflecting and knowing where you went wrong in the first place is super important.
Definitely.
When you did your undergrad, did you know you were interested in pediatrics, or did you kind of figure that out during medical school?
I've always had an affinity for children, but I think I also wanted to look into OB-GYN. I just thought it was such a cool field. And I think it wasn't until I actually did my rotations in both pediatrics and OB-GYN, and I was just you know what, I do love kids more. And I started to evaluate the lifestyle, started looking at residents to see how they were living, and how they were just going about their day-to-day lives in the hospital. And I think for me, I just knew that it was more peds than OB-GYN. So
Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that, because I felt like in OBGYN, it was going to be you help deliver the baby and then you get to interact with the baby, but that's not true. The pediatrician comes right in and they're like, so I feel like that it's really great that, I mean, it took rotations to kind of figure that out, but that's really great. What made you feel like peds, other than the lifestyle between OBGYN and pediatrics, what else do you feel like made you realize that pediatrics was the field for you?
yeah, so I think I paid attention to how my energy was while I was in these rotations. While I was in peds, I noticed that I was waking up before my alarm, literally all the time, waking up before my alarm, was always going in early, staying late. And it didn't feel like work, even though I was doing maybe the same hours as I was in OB-GYN. It's just, I think deep down, and sometimes you just have to listen to your intuition. also, I think just looking at the attendings on the floors, seeing how they were interacting with each other, seeing the type of environment that they were upholding. I think for me, I was just like, wow, I really want to be in this program. Like, I really want to be in Peds. They seem happy and healthy and just very in love with what they do. So.
Yeah, that's really great. I feel like most pediatricians I know are generally very happy people, but I mean, I think kids uplift you. It's very sad. I mean, not that it's not sad seeing adults be sick, but it's sad when like kids are usually so like energetic and they're always running around and very playful, and then they're just like not themselves. It's really sad. So I think
my favorite part. So
it's definitely a rewarding job, I think. In terms of preparing your application, is there anything when you were in basic sciences that you did in particular to help you strengthen your application from a pediatric standpoint?
Let's see. So in basic sciences, I think for me, well, when you're applying, people tell you that letters are important. But when you do your basic sciences, you come to realize that the letters don't come up until like much later during your clinical years, right? So I think for me, I focused on my grades because that for me was like the most important thing that while I was in undergrad, kind of like prevented me from getting into the US schools. So I knew that the scores was gonna be the defining factor and what had to like they would use to filter me out. So I focused on that, made sure that I got the content and prepared properly for step one. I also knew what else could I control, like extracurricular activities. They wanted to see that you're more than just like the numbers. So I did do a lot of like volunteer work, joining a lot of organizations and being a part of the executive board so that I could just be involved and, you know, just be well-rounded, I think. So that's just the basic sciences part. In terms of clinical, I don't know if you want me to go into that now.
Yeah, absolutely. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so for clinical years, I think for me, again, the scores are really important, but I think that your letters at that point become really, really important, especially in your fourth year, like ending of third year, beginning of fourth year. You want to make sure that you are working really hard so that the attendings notice what you're doing, the residents know what you're doing to get the best letters possible, you know? So I think, yeah, letters come much later, and I think the scores in the beginning, basic sciences really help you.
Yeah, I agree. I think even now that step one will be transitioning to pass fail, it's a little unfortunate because I think, like you said, step one is an important factor in kind of putting us on the same playing field in terms of competitivity as US students. It's the one thing that can really make us stand apart regardless of, you know, whether we're labeled as an IMG or a St. George's student, whatever we're labeled as. Unfortunately, we're also labeled as our SEF score, which is the sad reality of things. But I think, like you mentioned in clinical sciences, CK is equally as important as your letters of recommendation. I think that'll kind of be the new defining factor in terms of putting us on an even playing field from an IMG standpoint. When you were in your pediatrics rotation, what did you do in particular to sort of set yourself apart from other students and make sure that you got a good letter of recommendation?
So I think one of the things that I think even came up later in my interview was a comment that an attending made in one of my letters. And I think that one was really important because it showed the program that like this girl really does work hard. I was the first one there, even before the attendings. Like I would just, especially in clinic, I would just sit there and just wait for them to show up. And when they were ready to give out patients, I was like just there and ready. And towards the ending, I was always like asking if there was extra help that was needed. I wouldn't like leave. You know how sometimes you're doing rotations and it's not your field of interest, so like you're trying to leave and like you definitely like don't want to do that, right? So I would just stay extra late and always helping out the residents because I know it's like they also pay attention to what you're doing and they put in a good word to the attendings. So I think those, in terms of like clinical aspect. The other thing was, I think for me, research during Peds. So I think I looked for research that wasn't necessarily in the field, because at one point I didn't know if it was OB-GYN or Peds, but I looked for something that would like cover residency in general.
Right.
And then I was able to start the research, work with a couple of attendings, and then the research doesn't necessarily have to be published before you apply. I think a lot of people kind of get that, they misunderstand like how it should be, but I started it and I was able to put it on my application, and it wasn't until like much later that I had it published, and at that time I had already been in residency. So just doing all those things that you see people tell you, like do research, get your letters, work hard, make sure your scores are great, all those things come into play, and then it just helps you become well-rounded, I think.
Yeah, that was a really great answer. And since you're talking about research, how important do you think research was in terms of, like, how big of a factor do you think it was for getting a residency in pediatrics? Very important, kind of important, not that important?
I would say kind of important to very, like in between those two, kind of important to very important. It's not as important as certain specialties like urology. I know other colleagues who were doing like 5 or 6, and I was still on my first one, like trying to find one, like, but they were just like doing it one after the other. So just in terms of like comparisons, it's not as important, but just because you're going into residency, it's nice to show that you have something, you know?
Yeah, and I think the other benefit of research, especially during clinical rotations, is it's another way that your attendings can get to know you a little bit better, because not only are you the first one there and you're the last one to leave, but you're also staying later or maybe coming in an extra day to be in the lab or help write a paper or whatever you're writing up, the case report, whatever it may be. They kind of just get to interact with you a little bit more one-on-one. And I think that it's important for building relationships, even if it's not something you're super excited about putting on your application. It's definitely helpful to build those relationships, because it's not always easy to work one-on-one with attendings. And I think that's a good way to get it.
Yep, and they'll get to know your name, because you know how sometimes they're surrounded by like 5 medical students who go in and out, plus 12 residents, and like, who are you? How are you different from anyone else who's in the crowd? You know?
True. And then Peds is 6 weeks long, so they have like 6 different groups of students come throughout the entire.
Yeah. Wow.
Everyone just starts to blend together, I'm sure, after a while. And then in terms of step scores, since we kind of touched on that as well, I was looking on the NRMP match statistics, and it looks like the average score for Peds is somewhere in the low to mid 220s for both IMGs and US students alike. How was your score in comparison to this? You don't have to give it a specific number.
I would say that my score was above the average, but even then, I still know people who had like 214 who still matched. I do know people who had scores like that and still didn't feel comfortable matching. So, I mean, applying. So they just like decided to just try again the following year. But I know people who have succeeded in just applying and matching with a score that is like falls right in that range. But I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is like who you know, who you can talk to, and who can vouch for you. You'd be surprised how, I mean, you would know because you've done it too, but it's, the letters really hold a lot of weight.
Definitely.
Right.
And I think, like you mentioned, you don't know who knows who. And I mean, step scores, again, they're just a number. Sure, they do help set us apart from, you know, US applicants or, you know, all the other IMGs who are applying as well. But at the end of the day, if someone knows your work ethic, even if you don't have a great score, if your like clinical knowledge is there, they're not going to, I don't see a reason why they would be like, we don't want you because your step score is not that good, even though you have more than enough clinical knowledge and you succeed well when you're on the floors and when you're in the clinic. I think that a lot of people are often discouraged by this whole average, but I think a lot of people forget to remember that an average means there are people above, but there are also
exactly. It's a really important point to
plenty of people below. So don't let that discourage you if your score is slightly below or even significantly below. There's always step 2 CK. Improvement is super important. Trends are super important. Program directors care a lot about the trends, believe it or not. And arguably CK might even be more important because
now, yeah,
knowledge is important. And they don't remember the Krebs cycle either. So I don't think they can hold it against you.
And I think now step 1 is pass fail. I think
starting in January.
Yeah.
Or something like that. But we'll see how that goes. So next question, kind of moving on from the application and medical school to the whole interview process. What do you feel like your most commonly asked interview question was?
Let's see. So it was a lot of my interview questions were very, I don't want to say casual, but laid back. I don't know if it's just because it was Peds or if that's how it was in general.
Peds are nice.
I think I got asked about my strengths or like what I can bring to the program. And usually the most favorite ones just tell me about yourself. You have to have something to say, right? So I think those two. I don't know what it was like for you.
I would say tell me about yourself was by a long shot my most commonly asked question, for sure. And it's so frustrating because it's so vague. You could literally say anything and it's hard to pick what you should even say because you want to say something like enough, but you also don't want to blab on for 15 minutes. So I feel like that it's a balance, but then after a while it becomes very like robotic and your brain's just like,
oh, yeah. I think after like my interviews down the road, I just stopped. In the beginning, I was like, oh my God, I had to prep. But
it's the same. At one point you have to stop prepping because you start sounding so like mechanical.
It's like a robot. I'm just like, you know what? I'm just gonna just wing it. It'll sound more natural that way, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's natural to stutter once in a while. So let's go with that.
There was one time they asked me a question and I had practiced another answer.
Oh, jeez.
Another answer for like, it was like a similar question, but I started answering. I'm just like, whoa, that is no way. So yeah.
Yeah, the interviews towards the end are hard because when they hit you with a question you haven't been asked in a while, you're just like, wait, this isn't part of like my mechanical system here. I forgot what I'm supposed to say.
Yeah, I did get like hard ones though, like an ethical one. They gave me like a situation. They were like this. I don't want to say like details, but they put me in like in a scenario, and they're like, "What would you do? What would you tell the mom?" I'm just like,
wow,
not prepared for that. But
no, were you asked any like medical questions on your interviews at all?
No, the only one that was close to being medical was the one I just talked about, which I think there was a kid, and it was like, it was ethical, but it kind of had to do with a little bit of like medicine, giving advice, like how to cater to the parents, but not just push the lines. I don't know. I don't want to give too much detail.
No, that's totally fine. I don't understand like when, I don't know, when medical questions are asked. You have my step score. Anyways, in terms of applying, as an IMG, how many programs did you apply to for Peds?
Okay, so I know that for US, on average, or from what I know, they would apply to like 40, maybe even 20-ish, depending on how good their scores are. I know that for IMGs, it's like double that. I don't know how many you applied to, but initially I applied to about 80. And then everyone around me was kind of freaking out. Everyone around me was freaking out. It was just like, no, we have to apply to more. I know people who had scores in like 250s just applying for like, and I'm just like, whoa, okay. I need to like step my game up a little bit.
Like, I collect $2 and I'll apply to some more.
Yeah. I definitely applied to like over 100.
Okay, as did I. I applied, I think I originally applied to 100, and then I also, everyone was like 120, 150, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll find some more that I'm interested in, I guess.
I did like 124 or 126. But I ended up like canceling those that were like further out, Texas.
Same situation here. Same situation here. I think it depends. You have to know the strength of your application. If you have a very strong application, very strong scores, a little bit of research, a little bit of volunteer experience, and just kind of things in every category, you're probably safe to go on the end closer to 80s rather than 120s, or else you're going to be canceled. You're probably going to cancel a lot of interviews. Did you apply for a secondary specialty or just peds?
Just peds. I knew peds was it.
Peds was it, and we didn't want to do anything else. I like it. I think a fantastic approach. In terms of, again, in your interviews, what do you think program directors were looking for in an applicant when it came down to ranking them?
Okay. I think in the interview, for me, I felt like they needed to make that connection with you and like vibe with you a little bit. In my first couple of interviews, I was a little nervous, so I wasn't as like relaxed and as outgoing as I was in like much later ones. So I think the way I also arranged my interviews were like the ones that I wasn't really keen on, I put in the beginning so that I could use those as practice. So I noticed that I wasn't like vibing with them as well, but towards the middle, the ones that I really wanted, I would just try to just be myself, just be comfortable, be relaxed, and then just have a conversation. And I think they will remember you that way. And then I think everything else comes into play, like your letters of recommendations. If they've seen it and they're like, wow, this person wrote something really strong, we love this, or we've seen that you're very hardworking, XYZ. So I think those things will just all fall into play. But yeah, I think just being myself helped me a lot. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because personal statements are like their way of assessing who you are before they meet you. But then a lot of the red flags come up where the person in front of them isn't the person in the personal statement. And that kind of raises like a red flag for them. So I think being yourself, being the same person who conveyed the passion for whatever you're interested in your personal statement is super important. So convey the same passions that you did in your personal statement, convey the same passion for the hobbies that you put on your application, make sure that they're able to see the same passion and the same person who wrote everything on the paper in front of them when you get to the interview. I think that's really
they invited you for a reason. They invited you because they liked your personal statement.
Exactly.
And if they're different, they're just like, yeah, no.
Yeah. It's really like a dating service. That's what I compare. That's what I call the match. I call it a dating service for medicine.
100%.
And then in terms of being a competitive applicant, what part of your application in your opinion, do you think made you stand out apart from other applicants the most?
I don't think it was my research because I think I just had like one research from medical school and like maybe one or two from undergrad. So I don't think it was my research. Although my research, the content, maybe it was like resident burnout. So they were like, oh, okay. So we had like things to talk about. So in that sense, yeah. But in terms of like the number of research, I don't think that. I do think that my letters helped me a lot. And I think just maybe the volunteer. But these things, I just have to say that it comes with after they've like filtered out your grades and everything, like, to see if like you would make it through. But I think those two, like my letters and my outside extracurricular stuff.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, when you were in basic sciences, just for anyone who's watching this, who's interested in applying for pediatrics and might be in terms 1 through 5 at specifically SGU, what organizations can they get involved in that are, I guess, pediatrics related, if that's what they're looking to do?
Well, there are plenty of orgs. There's the main pediatric one, which I started in the beginning. And then I found another one that I was in while I was in college, and it was like another chapter at SGU. So I just preferred to do that one. That one was SNMA, is the Student National Medical Association. And with that one, we did like a bunch of different things. We did like diabetic clinics. We would go out into Grenada and just do like workup and testing on the elderly in the neighborhood. So it wasn't even related to pediatrics, but it came up in a couple of my interviews.
Right.
Yeah, so there's that. There's also, if your grades are good, you can get into like IEA, and then with that, they also help you do community service initiatives and all those different things. There's AMSA. There's so many, like a whole list. You'll find something if you look. You know, there are people who didn't do anything, and I mean, yeah.
I agree. Did you do any, I know you mentioned you did clinical research when you were in your clinical years. Did you also do any volunteer experiences while you were in New York, or no?
I was in, so I don't know if you heard of like the Gold Humanism Honor Society. Yes. So with that one, there was a branch in Grenada and there was another branch here. So we got together a couple of times. We discussed some initiatives, but we didn't really get to finish through before application season.
Right.
So I think that played like a huge factor, but I would still go out into like, if there were like walks, like the gun violence walk and projects like that, so just to go out and help out. And then these are just things you can put on your application. There was one that I did with my church, actually. It was once a month, so it wasn't that like exhaustive. And then, so once a month, every Sunday, one Sunday in a month, I would go spend the whole day from like 8 to 3 p.m. And then that would be it. But I did that long term for like the 2 years, the year and a half that I was doing my clinical. So I think that one.
Which I think you bring up another important point with that, in the sense that it's not about how many volunteer experiences you have on your application. It's more about what you put into them and what you get out of them. And I think the best way to do that is by committing to something long-term. The longer you're involved in it, likely the more passionate you're going to become about it. And the easier it is to get involved and actually see, I guess, kind of how you develop and the skills you develop from that specific extracurricular activity.
I agree with you 100%.
And then in terms of being an IMG, in your opinion, on the whole interview season application process, what is the most difficult thing you faced as an IMG? How did you overcome it? And what advice would you have for someone who is going through a similar crisis?
I think in terms of like, if you do your like work well, if you get the grades that you need to stay in the pool when it's time to get filtered out, I think you'll be fine. And the IMG factor doesn't really play that big of a role. I think just personally, I felt like, okay, yeah, my scores were good, my extracurriculars, my letters were there, but I always had that doubt that, okay, what if I don't match? What if I don't match? And I think for me, that was one of like the hardest things. Because even up until like match day, people are like, oh, you're going to be fine. I'm like, no, what if I don't?
You don't know?
You just don't know, because being an IMG, there's so much stigma and so much misconceptions. But so I think that was one. Surprisingly, during interview trial, or during this whole application process, I feel like I did meet a lot of people who were not only from SGU, but just IMGs in general. Granted, I didn't interview at like the main New York City hospitals, like, you know, like in Manhattan.
Right.
But even then, like all the other hospitals, I feel like there were so many IMGs that I just felt comfortable, like, wow, they're actually doctors.
Yeah, I think that's a feeling I experienced during interview season as well, because I think also when you get invited to a program, especially when there's not a lot of IMGs in the program, when they do have someone who is an IMG on staff or as a resident, even if it's only one or two, I think they know that we feel this way, because I feel like they kind of put forth the effort to be like, oh, you should talk to this person by the end of today. Like, they're from your school and it would be great to like connect you guys. Like, I think they know that it kind of makes us uncomfortable. And I think a lot of this stigma, thankfully, is starting to slowly fade. We have a ways to go, but I think people are starting to realize, like, we do I mean, I think we doubt ourselves more than the average person for sure, which is unfortunate. But I think seeing people like you, people like me, people like I'm interviewing be on the other side is very not only inspiring but helpful in terms of making connections for like the future generations.
Ooh, 100%. Yes, and that's actually how I gained the confidence to kind of like finish putting my application in. I went on Instagram years ago and I saw someone from Ross and I just like was stalking her. I was just like, oh my God. Just like looking at her page, I'm just like, oh my gosh, she's done with basic sciences. She's almost in clinicals. Like she's applying. And I'm just like, wow, she's doing everything that people tell you you're not going to be able to do if you're an IMG. And she was just doing it, living her life. I was like, yeah, this is it.
Yeah, I think it's nice to have social media in a way. I think compared to when we entered, I feel like there wasn't as much positive information out there. I remember vividly, like when I was going to SGU, I was reading the forums, and of course, the only things on the forums are like negative, and they make you feel like you're never going to be successful in life. And I think that it's really nice to have a larger platform like Instagram and having a lot of IMGs share their success stories, because it is very encouraging and it does let people who are very serious going into Caribbean medical school that it can be done. It's possible if you work really, you have to work really hard, like really, really hard, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree.
So I don't have any other questions for you, but if you have anything else you'd like to share, whether it is specific to pediatrics, not specific to pediatrics, specific to IMGs, not specific to IMGs, please feel free to share.
I think the one thing I do want to stress, and I think I've mentioned it throughout, is the importance of your letters of recommendations. I think it's just really, really important to make sure that you're working really hard, especially in your third and fourth year, to just get those letters. Yeah, make sure they're strong letters too, not just like, you know.
No, that's a good point. I think when you ask for a letter of recommendation, you don't want to ask your attending if they can write you a letter of recommendation, because of course they're capable of writing you like a letter of recommendation. They've written a million, but you want to ask if they can write you a strong letter of recommendation, because I say all the time, it's very easy to be an average medical student. And honestly, especially rotating in New York, it's pretty easy when you're with a big group of people to just kind of slip away. And honestly, not many people will notice. But people will notice if you are the last one there, if you're always in their way, and if you are there before them. So I have no other questions for you. I just wanted to say thank you again so much for agreeing to do this. I know intern year is so busy and it's such a big learning curve. And at the end of the day, it's super exhausting and we don't want to do things like this. But I think that so many people are going to appreciate it. I think so many people are going to benefit from the conversation and your advice in general. So thank you so much. I want everyone to experience the same feeling we did on match day. I know your video it makes me cry every time I watch it. So I'm going to repost your video with this clips so that people know, like, this is what you're working for. This is the feeling you are working for.
My cheeks hurt. Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much for having me. I know you're busy as well, but we definitely had to get this in, and I love it.